My name is Abner Schumann, and I am a 94-year-old Holocaust survivor. I was a teenager in western Belarus when the Germans arrived in my village. That was the day that my entire world ended. It was Armageddon, in the very sense of the word. The non-Jewish villagers helped the invading Nazis to round us up. They had hated us long before they'd even heard of Adolf Hitler. Anyone that was deemed fit to work was thrown into a cramped, freezing railcar and taken to Mali-Trostinet's concentration camp, which is where my story takes place. What I believed happened in June of 1944 may have been a figment of my imagination, a grand hallucination, the desperate attempts of a broken man to piece together some kind of meaning amidst pure, unbridled horror and tragedy. I was starving, sleep-deprived, and overcome with grief at the loss of my family and friends, so I am not about to claim that I maintained a stable mind. Many of my fellow prisoners suffered madness during that time, claiming to have seen and heard all kinds of things during their imprisonment. But as I sit here, in the twilight of my life, I feel that I must relate things that felt as real to me then as writing this does now. The summer of 1944 was a scorching one. My labor gang was given the backbreaking task of digging a canal from the nearby river to the camp itself, all in the sweltering midday heat. We were barely fed, rarely watered, with the SS guards only passing out canteens of lukewarm, unfiltered water when men had begun to vomit and pass out from heat stroke. I remember the hunger like it was yesterday. The wrenching, twisting pain that lived with you on a daily basis. All you could ever think of was to get something to eat. At night, we would dream of feasts, surrounded by family and friends that we would never see again. One afternoon, as the sun was perched high in a cloudless blue sky, one of our fellow prisoners suddenly stopped working. He stared off into the distance, silently staring into shimmering haze. An SS guard cursed at him, racking a bullet into the chamber of his rifle. The prisoner snapped. His pupils dilated, froth forming at the corners of his mouth as he commenced to rant and rave. We tried to calm him down, but it proved impossible. The man was rabid, wild-eyed. He had completely lost his mind. At first, the black uniformed SS guards just laughed, mimicking him in pidgin Russian. This only infuriated the madman as he turned and glared at his detractors, trembling with a frenzied rage. "Rache," he growled, drool spilling from his lips as it leaked around his swollen tongue. "Rache, Rache, Rache is nah, nah." "Revenge," he screamed. "Revenge is near," over and over at the guards, laughing as he did so. The maniacal, haunting laugh of a doomed man who had nothing left to give. The guards stopped laughing as they began to comprehend his broken German. They looked at each other nervously as their mockery ceased, but as he continued his tirade, they started to look downright frightened. It didn't take long before one of the guards took out a sidearm, aimed it squarely at the madman's face and fired a shot. The man collapsed into the canal, blood squirting from the small rough hole torn through his forehead. We were ordered to dig his grave. "Jundisch rotten," the guard hissed, spitting on the body of the dead lunatic. The lunatic whose face was still etched with a feverish smile, even in death. It began the next day. Something was wrong with the river. Something terribly wrong. Much to our relief, all work on the canal was suspended until the situation could be resolved. Information was like a currency in those days. When you have nothing, something as simple as news becomes as valuable as gold. Scrambling for what little we could glean, we finally securing an audience with a member of a working party that had seen the condition of the nearby watercourse. "It's the heat," the man related, The heat has reduced the amount of water, making the river muddy and slow. The guards say nothing can be transported using it until the weather is cooled and we get some rain. A heated argument broke out between the man explaining and another of the labor gang. Yes, the color has changed, but it is just clay. Clay is dissolving into the river. That is what changes the color. He was an educated man, and many of us were. Have you ever seen a river that color, Isaac? The other man argued. No, and neither have I. The river ran red. Red, Isaac. Red with the blood of our Hebrew brothers and sisters. The educated man tried to argue back, but we were finished listening. We had escaped the filthy, sweaty work of ditch digging. For now. The next morning, as the blazing summer sun rose over cramped wooden barracks, I awoke to a noise I hadn't heard since my childhood. The gentle, steady rhythm of a croaking frog floated through row after row of comfortless wooden bunks. There was just one at first, the faintest of noises, almost relaxing. But it was shortly joined by others. Many others. Soon hundreds of small olive green amphibians were hopping through the camp. I had never seen anything quite like it. They're escaping the dried up river, one prisoner cried. They're looking for another body of water. We were soon tasked with clearing out the camp, even given a few shovels to bash the small creatures before heaping their broken bodies into waiting wheelbarrows. It was grim work, but it beat digging the canal. Yet as much as we tried, we were unable to stem the tide of frogs that hopped towards us from the dying river. Those that weren't crushed by swings of our shovels died in the scorching heat of the June sun. Dehydrated and slow, they expired where they lay. To our disgust, the lack of frogs in the nearby river meant that the insect population went unchecked. Not to mention, the masses of amphibian carcasses that littered the camp attracted all kinds of maggots and swarming and carrying hungry flies. A particularly aggressive variety of horsefly also invaded the camp at this point, giving the guards a rather rough time indeed. Some of the nastier bites grew inflamed and infected, leaking pale yellow pus and blood when they burst around exposed flesh. Much to our delight, some of the more spiteful guards were hospitalized in rather serious conditions. Yet there was something disconcerting about the selectivity of the biting insects, something that was overlooked in our joy that certain hated guards were suffering. Very few of the affected men were camp prisoners. Yes, I had seen one or two men who had been bitten, some rather badly. But to my knowledge, not one of them had suffered an infection or any kind of medical complication arising from an insect bite. A week later, the Russian artillery started. The booming explosions of distant shells grew closer as Russian forces began to take back our country, inch by inch. We hoped that the Red Army would liberate us, but the camp guards remained defiant in the face of their annihilation. Russian dogs, they would joke. Any day now they'll run out of bodies to throw at us, and then we'll turn the tide again. Moscow will be ours by next summer. You just wait. That night, we were awoken by a huge crashing noise that sent the camp guards into high alert. They were terrified that the Russians were attacking, and we prayed that they were. However, it eventually became apparent that a German light bomber was attempting to return to a nearby airfield after being hit by an anti-aircraft fire. It broke up in the skies over the camp, sending debris plummeting to earth. A section of the wing sliced into the guards' barracks, killing several of them. At dawn, we were tasked with clearing up the mess left by the fallen aircraft. As we worked, picking up pieces of pulverized flesh, bone, and cloth uniform, the skies darkened and rain finally broke. It was relief beyond words. Prisoners celebrated under the downpour, chastised by guards that still mourned the accidental deaths of their comrades. The deluge washed away weeks of sweat and grime, purifying us. For a brief moment, we felt free again. And then that afternoon, as the temperatures plummeted, and an unusual chill danced in the air. A dense fog rolled in. It was the most impenetrable mist that I'd ever seen, before or since. You could barely see a couple of meters in front of you. The entire camp was plunged into near darkness, so completely consumed by the fog that we were confined to our barracks for the remainder of the working day. The mist still clung to the camp when we lay our heads down to sleep. Usually I would fall asleep after peering out of a small gap in the wooden slats of our barracks. I would watch the handful of guards patrolling with their electric torches, inspecting the structures with their rifles slung over their shoulders. I tried to memorize their faces, every little feature, just in case there would ever be a day when these men would answer for their crimes. But that night, I saw something that still creeps into my mind on the darkest of nights, keeping me awake. Something I never really cared to rationalize. A figure walked among the barracks, one that didn't wear a uniform or carry a rifle. Due to the fog, they were hard to distinguish, and at first I thought it was an escaped prisoner. I made out ragged clothes and a pale complexion that seemed sickly in the dim moonlight. But something was wrong with the way the figure moved. It walked lightly, almost weightlessly, an unnatural stillness to its gait. I fell asleep wondering just who I had been looking at. The following day was our last in the camp. We awoke to a panic. Still locked in our barracks, we peered through the small gaps in the wooden walls at camp guards rushing around in a frenzy. They looked panicked, eyes wide with shock and terror. There seemed to be even less of them than usual. "There's been an accident," one man exclaimed. "Something about the guards. Something happened during the night." One guard was openly weeping, sobbing over his oldest brother who had happened to be a guard at the camp. Other men in black uniforms tried to console him, telling him that passing away whilst asleep is the most peaceful way to go. The surviving SS guards were tense. They were under strength now. There were many of us and very few of them. We sensed it before they even gave the orders. We could feel the atmosphere of terror that gripped the few last that remained. We were to be liquidated. We began to break our way out of the wooden prison, as the guards began to empty their machine guns into the first barracks, massacring a large number of trapped prisoners. Men threw themselves into the barred door, 2 or 3 at a time as the rest of us watched in horror, as the enraged SS men then set fire to the bullet-riddled building before moving on to the next. "Come on, Abner, throw your damn weight into it, break it open for the love of God." "You try then, old man. Use your own damn body, the door would break you." The guards were shooting the second locked barracks now, screaming and cursing as they did. They were relishing the slaughter, smiling and laughing as they murdered us. Just as the door in our barracks is beginning to give way, we noticed the door of another burst open, the occupants spilling out into the grim, gray lights of the foggy morning. They rushed the firing guards, vengeance in their eyes, not caring that they were shot to pieces as they charged. The door finally tore from its hinges in front of me, letting in the smell of blood and cordite into the air. I was weak, starving. I don't know where I summoned the strength to do so, but I ran. I was not alone either. Throngs of prisoners were running with me, pulling at the barbed wire fences, kicking the posts and creating little escape routes for themselves. Some were hit by stray bullets as they tried to flee, collapsing into the mud or hanging on the razor-sharp wire like twisted marionettes. We could still hear the gunfire as we reached a nearby tree line and disappeared into the woods. After the war, I took a boat to America. Looking up at the Statue of Liberty as our ship approached the New York harbor, I was surprised that I did not feel the jubilation that I expected to. Guilt. It was guilt that weighed down my happiness that day. Wondering why it was I that had survived, while so many of us met their ends in the dark, dingy death camps of the Nazis. I have since moved to Skokie, Illinois, where so many others who understand what I have been through have chosen to make their home. I have married, had children, watched them grow up and have children of their own. I have surrounded myself with love. But I am sad to say that this has not restored my faith in humanity. That part of me died in the 40s and was never resurrected. But there is another kind of faith that I have not lost. One that is much harder for me to explain fully. Since the war, religion has not come easy to me. I try to keep kosher. However, God is going to have to explain to me why He forbid us to eat shrimp while making them so delicious. I do not observe a lot of our more obscure holidays, but I always celebrate Passover. Every year I remember the spirit of death that passed over Egypt, reaping a terrible vengeance on the people that had kept my people slaves for so long. I may have lost faith in mankind, but I have never lost faith in the power of avenging angels.